Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the Voice of Reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Today, we have learned over the past 24 hours, the last several hours actually, the Russian armed forces have launched another series of large-scale missile attacks against both Ukrainian military targets and critical infrastructure targets all across Ukraine. Specifically, we are starting to see an uptick in the use of the KH-47 hypersonic missile. Well, I don't want to call it a hypersonic missile. It is a high supersonic missile capable of reaching speeds of Mach 10 to Mach 12. Just to give you an idea how fast that is. It is between 7,000 and 8,000 miles per hour, or 12 to 14,000 kilometers per hour. So an incredibly fast weapon system. Again, an air-launched weapon that is normally launched from a MiG-31, upgraded version of a MiG-31. And has a very, very large warhead capable of also being used as a nuclear weapon as well, being armed with a nuclear warhead. The warhead weight is something over 1,000 pounds. So we know, or at least the Ukrainians are reporting, that at least 6 of these weapons, these KH-47 daggers, were launched against various targets in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are openly saying that they have no defense against this weapon system. It travels too fast, and Ukrainian air defenses are simply unable to target this specific weapon. Now, it wasn't just the KH-47s that the Russians launched. The majority of the missiles that were fired against targets in Ukraine recently, within the last 24 hours, were various cruise missiles as well. So we have seen Caliber cruise missiles launched from seaborne assets. And then, of course, the vast majority of the cruise missiles launched were KH-101s from various bomber aircraft, either backfire bomber or Bear bombers. But again, the Russians looked like they were targeting in excess of 100 aim points or targets throughout Ukraine. The Ukrainians are reporting that they've shot down a number of these cruise missiles. They were unable to shoot down any of the dagger, the KH-47 daggers. The Russians also used another high supersonic missile. It's the KH-22. It's an older system, originally designed for the use against shipborne targets, basically a very large, fast anti-ship weapon system that also has the ability to target the radiation signature coming from radars as well. We believe that the Russians have placed onto these large anti-ship missile systems GLONASS receivers, which essentially they have turned them into precision attack weapon systems, where they just don't have to use their onboard radars to locate, identify, and hit their target, such as they would use against seaborne targets. So again, by simply modifying these existing systems, putting GLONASS receivers on them, again, the Russian version of GPS, they are able to hit targets. Now, we've heard that some of these, especially recently, the KH-22 and other systems have reportedly hit apartment blocks and malls and civilian targets. Now, we believe that has happened. We obviously believe that Russia, in its ongoing operation, has hit civilian targets, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Now, the only reason I would believe that you would waste a very expensive hypersonic or high sonic weapon system, very expensive weapon system, on a alleged civilian target was if troops and soldiers, supplies were being based at these sites. And it's, again, look, where else is the Ukrainian military going to put its soldiers? Many of its military bases have been destroyed. So outside of putting troops in already rubbleized military bases or in open fields with tents, the only real ability that the Ukrainians would have to house these troops or station these troops, quarter these troops, garrison these troops, or even use civilian areas as defensive redoubts is in these civilian areas. So yes, thus the Russians are going to target these areas. If it has, or they believe, meaning they, the Russians, believe that there are Ukrainian troops being quartered or housed or being used in this area, in a certain area, then it's going to get hit. Just like if you were to look at U.S. operations in Iraq, obviously the insurgents used, and I'm not saying the Ukrainians are insurgents by any means, they're a nation state attempting to defend itself, or it believes it's trying to defend itself. But going back to the Iraq War, insurgents, what have you, were using civilian areas as A, defensive redoubts, and then B, also areas where they would shelter themselves, and the U.S. would strike those targets. And then sometimes in striking those targets, civilians would be killed. I would say that within the context of this war, if you can compare and contrast other wars in history, for example, World War II, civilians are being spared at a much greater rate than what we have seen in World War II. I mean, in World War II, you didn't have GPS GLONASS guided weapon systems. You didn't have laser guided bombs. You had very, very limited amounts of precision attack capability. So the Allies and the Germans would both carpet bomb civilian cities. You're not seeing that take place in this conflict. You are seeing civilians being killed and wounded, unfortunately, but within the context of war, I don't think you're ever going to be able to eliminate that. And what we've seen in terms of some of these Russian strikes, unfortunately killing civilians, it is the byproduct of war. I don't believe it is with the intention that Russia is attempting to kill Ukrainian civilians, just as I don't believe that the Ukrainian military is in all probability trying to exterminate and wipe out Russian supported cities in the eastern Donbass. We just haven't seen the type of kinetic operation that both sides have the capability to utterly level certain areas. And with the exception of Mariupol, which, while unfortunate, again, largely a byproduct of war. But back to the Russian missile attack that has taken place over the last 24 hours. Again, you can see as well the Russian military-industrial complex start to ramp up and start to produce new weapon systems. The Kh-47 was a fairly new weapon system, and going into this conflict, we weren't quite sure how many the Russians have, but the Russians appear to have a number of these weapon systems that they are now using against the Ukrainians. And I would imagine, given the Ukrainians' inability to shoot this missile down, this very large semi-ballistic high sonic weapon system down, that we'll probably see more and more of these Kh-47s being produced and used in this conflict. It's apparent that the Ukrainians have a much better chance of shooting down the slower flying cruise missiles calibers Kh-101s than they do against going after these much faster missiles such as S-300s, S-400s that have been converted to a ground attack role, the Kh-22s, the Kh-47s. But again, we'll probably see a uptick in the use and deployment of these high sonic weapon systems, of these high supersonic weapon systems. We continue to watch the fighting take place in Bakhmut. Right now, it does appear that, again, things are incredibly tenuous on the Ukrainian side. The Russians have broken into, or the fighting is reported very close to the city center. Now, you have two areas. You have the city center, which is just across the river. We've heard reports that the Ukrainians possibly blew up a dam, making it more difficult to cross this river, while at the same time you have another industrial area here in the west. But again, it appears to be, at least right now, very difficult for the Ukrainians to leave Bakhmut. So they have no alternative but to stay and fight at this point. It's either stay, fight, or surrender. And given the recent reported harsh treatments of prisoners of war, they could be hesitant to surrender. And I would say both sides at this point may be hesitant to surrender, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of animosity now within the confines of this conflict, obviously. And in all probability, there are units that are operating under the black flag, meaning they are not taking prisoners. And, again, within the context of war, we have seen this in other wars. We've seen this not just in this war, we have seen it in other wars, to include World War II with the Allies not taking prisoners. I've had conversations with World War II veterans who were fighting against the Germans, and they openly stated that they did not take German prisoners, especially if they were members of the SS. But again, just the nature of war, of conflict. But right now, it does appear the Ukrainians don't have the ability to get out of Bakhmut. Thus, we are seeing this heavy fighting taking place as this cauldron closes in on the existing fighters that are continuing to fight in Bakhmut. So we anticipate this will continue to be a very bloody battle. We are hearing reports of a possible Ukrainian counteroffensive that could take place north or south. But we believe at this point that isn't realistic for what's happening on the ground right now. So we'll continue to cover. We will continue to report. We appreciate you joining us today. We will have more coverage very, very soon. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.